Well, the Standard newspaper on the front page, the headline reads, questionable fund. This talking about as President William Ruto'S hyped bottom-up economic transformation model falters with nothing much to show for the last 3 years. The administration seems to have abandoned Mama Mboga and is now going for mega infrastructure projects through the so-called Singapore dream. But despite Ruto selling his new pet strategy as Kenya's way into the fast world, financial experts have questioned the creation of a national infrastructure fund. Well, of course, more details on this story. Once you get your copy of the Standard newspaper tomorrow, you will find it in page 4 in the newspaper. Of course, this and much more in tomorrow's Standard newspaper. Thank you for watching. My name is Leangare. My sign language interpreter tonight has been Philip Omondi. As always, it's a pleasure to have you join us. Have a good night and God bless.
Of the newly rolled out e-procurement system seems to have paralyzed operations across the devolved units, with most counties recording zero expenditure in their development budget. The Controller of Budget Implementation Review report for the first quarter of this year shows that counties absorbed a paltry 2% of their development budget. Melita Oletenges reports.
According to the latest Controller of Budget report, counties that attained the highest overall absorption rates of their annual budgets are Isiolo County at 21%, Kitui at 18%, and Machakos, Nyeri and Uasin Gishu each at 14%. On the other hand, Turkana and Laikipia recorded the lowest aggregate absorption rates at 5% each, followed by Tana River, Nyandarua and Kericho, each at 4%. Baringo County received 1.64 billion in revenue in the first quarter of the financial year. However, the county spent 649 million paying salaries and financing its operations during the period. It spent 7.2 million shillings on sitting allowances for the county MCAs, with zero spending on development. Despite receiving 1.4 billion shillings during the first quarter, West Pokot County reported zero spending on developments, same as in the financial year 2024-2025. The county executive spent 750 million on compensation of employees, while the county assembly spent 95 million on compensation of employees. Despite a 1 billion revenue inequitable share and on-source revenue, Vihiga County registered no development expenditure in the first quarter. Expenditure on domestic travel amounted to 45 million and comprised 33.85 million spent by the county assembly and 11 million by the county executive. Expenditure on foreign travel amounted to 10 million shillings. Out of 3.8 billion, Turkana County registered in the first quarter from the national government and on-source revenue. 973 million was used on employee compensation. The county reported no spending on development programs. The counties that achieved the higher proportion of their local revenue collection to their respective annual revenue targets were Samburu County at 40%, Garissa County at 36%, Narok County at 35%. The counties with the lowest proportion of their local revenue collection were Kwale County at 9%, Nandi County at 7%, Siaya County at 6%. Kisii County registered an increase of 22.8% in revenue collection compared to the first quarter last year. The county reported spending 13.6 million on development programs. Trans Nzoia County received 1.9 billion in revenue, out of which 575 million was used to settle employee compensations. There were no foreign or domestic travels registered in the first quarter. The Controller of Budget has urged Parliament to expedite the enactment of the County Government's Allocation Act to ensure timely transfers from the national government to the county governments. Melita Oletenges, Citizen TV.
Election observers and human rights groups across Africa, led by former IEBC chairperson Ahmed Ishaq Hassan, are demanding urgent reforms at the IEBC or the resignation of its leadership. They accuse the Commission of bowing to the ruling regime and failing to deliver independent, free and fair by-elections, citing widespread voter bribery and chaos during the recent by-elections. The groups warned that the failures could plunge the 2027 presidential election into instability if left unaddressed. Willie Lusige reports.
With less than 2 years to the 2027 presidential election, observers and rights groups say the IEBC has already failed the test of independence and cannot be trusted to run a credible poll without urgent and far-reaching reforms. They point to violence, bribery and disorder in the Malava and Mbeere North by-elections, arguing Commission's inaction proves it is compromised and unwilling to enforce the law.
IEBC as currently constituted after the by-elections is disappointing. Monies were spent in the tons. Bribery was evident. People died. Cars were burned. But what do I see? Elections were successful. Successful, my foot.
The groups insist the IEBC leadership must either approve its independence now or step aside before the 2027 election.
That office is a protected office. They must be there to defend the nation of Kenya. And if they are not able to defend the nation of Kenya using that position, they should quietly resign and allow other people who are able to do it to come and take office.
Attention is also turning to the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, accused of being silent as hate speech rises and politicians openly divide the country along ethnic lines.
Listen occasionally to what is being said at funerals across the country. People are grouping themselves, and we see nothing wrong with it. Singapore did not become Singapore when tribe became the basis of mobilization. Singapore became Singapore because men and women became servants. When democracy was understood as a competition of ideas.
How do we reduce the tensions in the country? There's a lot of tension. We can't ignore that. I think the National Cohesion and Integration Commission will take urgent steps to start acting on this hate speech.
The groups warn that without swift action, the 2027 presidential election risks descending into violence and chaos, mirroring troubled polls elsewhere in the region. Willie Lusige, Citizen TV, Nairobi.
Democracy for the Citizens Party National Organizing Secretary Mithika Linturi has called out Public Service Cabinet Secretary Jeffrey Ruku and Embu Governor Cecily Mbarire over their claim that Mount Kenya East will break away from the West and chart its own political path. The former Cabinet Secretary also took a swipe at elected leaders from the region, accusing them of remaining mum as their region descends into political chaos.
Roko, you have no moral authority to speak for Mount Kenya East. Auna hata ndabu, auna hata heshima, because wewe is an hireling. You are mercenary. Sasa wewe umepewa kiti, umepigiwa kiti na watu wa mbele. Umesafu miaka 2. Umeuza kiti, umesema wacha kikae, wacha mimi nikae waziri. You have just been leadership ya kuelektiwa ya miaka 2. And you really want to come and lecture us. Kama William Ruto alisaliti Linturi, akasaliti Muturi, akasaliti Gachagua, ambaye sisi tulitoa pesa, ambayo sisi alilala manyumba yetu, tukatoa pesa, akawa rais. Who do you think you are? And I'm telling Cecily Mbarire, my good sister, huyu hata wakati unaenda, you carry an interpreter.
The government spent 507.98 billion shillings to pay public debt over 3 months to September, marking the first time the half-a trillion shillings mark has been crossed during similar periods before. Now, the debt payments between July and September 2025 marked a 182.5 billion shillings increase compared to payments of 325.52 billion shillings during a similar period last year, underlining the burden for Treasury as it retired some external and domestic loans. New details by the Controller of Budget show this is the first time Kenya has spent more than half a trillion shillings on debt payments over similar periods, even as the public debt stock continues to rise. Kenya's government is facing a cash crunch. Salaries, roads, and key projects all need funding. But the National Treasury doesn't always have the money on hand. One tool now being used is securitization. Now tonight, NTV's Sylvia Kadhoni breaks down what securitization means and explain how it works.
So here's how securitization works in 4 steps. Identify revenue. Pick a predictable future revenue stream that could be taxes, levies, loan repayments. Bundle the revenue together. Group the payments into a single financial instrument. Sell to investors. Investors buy it, giving cash upfront. Repay investors. Future revenue pays back investors with returns.
In this office.
At the center of this process is a special purpose vehicle, or SPV, a legally separate entity created to collect the future revenue and repay investors.
I want you to understand, it's selling an asset. You have not borrowed, you have sold the rights. The person who is borrowing is that special purpose vehicle. Is going to borrow money to give you the money. It's like you have got money in advance on the basis of that 7 shillings. And to me, it's a practical, more realistic, more value for money approach.
In Kenya, several revenue streams have already been securitized, giving the government immediate cash to fund projects and clear bills. Legally, securitization is not unique to the government. Private companies use the same model to manage cash flows.
It gets the funding it needs upfront for receivables over a certain amount of time, and then it can then be able to use that money to be able to do other investments. So it allows you to get future revenues upfront.
But how does securitization compare to other financing tools?
As compared to a Eurobond, both of them have benefits that you kind of allows you to borrow at a less amount than what you typically be able to get from other sources. So, but largely, as I said, it's more of how they're used and for what they're used for. So if you use a Eurobond or a securitization to fund recurrent government expenditure, paying salaries and that type of thing, then you won't see the benefit of that because the cash will just be gobbled up and now that's future revenue coming in. But if it's then used for purposely, same thing with Eurobond, if they're then used for something which then generates more and more revenue for the government, then you can then be able to say, okay, fine, this has actually been used well.
For tax experts, transparency is what determines whether securitization builds trust or fuels public concern.
The same way that the KRA will or the Treasury will give tax expenditure reports annually, so that you can see that this is our tax expenditure this year, this is what we have forgone because of this. If we had such kind of transparency and being accountability, it would make the securitization an easier conversation and even more acceptable to most citizens.
Still, Beatrice warns securitization is not a long-term solution.
So if they are underperforming in future, then it would mean, assuming we are expected to pay, argument's sake, 100 million every month. In a certain month you under-collect, the government will have to come up with the shortfall. So where will the government get that money? Probably will get it from taxes or whatever was allocated for another need like healthcare or education. The government will have to make up for that shortfall because the obligation needs to be paid.
Securitization can unlock cash today, but it comes at the cost of tomorrow's revenue. Used carefully, it can ease short-term pressure. Used too often, it risks deepening the problem it's meant to solve.
In the securitization, then
Sylvia Kadhoni, NTV.
Ati black chocolate ni fine melanin bana kutoka nikapate kanapenda kenye mi wanapenda so kanapenda toto chupa na haga nono
madam na kudai umedunga mini na unapenda mangwai una dance fit unawacha nikismile ama niko high jua lies nice
Kono moja mbele ngine yenderembe baila